Hello and welcome to the Eternal Witnesses podcast, your favorite podcast for competitive, modern, legacy, and vintage Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Mark Mara, and I am here, as always, with the birdless man himself, Michael Mapson. Say hi, Mapson.
Hello.
And we are joined by a special guest today, Garrison Fogt. Hi, Garrison.
Hello.
And so both of these fellas are judges. And so, as you may or may not know, Worlds was recently. There was a little bit of judging controversy around that. Well, maybe not judging controversy per se, but a rulings one that we want to chat about. And so we have a couple of great folks on with us to talk about that. But first, before we jump right in, Garrison, let's let the people know who they're talking to. Give us a little background on who you are and how you got into Magic and how you found your way into judging.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. My name is Garrison Fogt. I'm a judge from Cookeville, Tennessee. I've been a judge since 2014, so going on 10 or 11 years now. But really started working big events back in 2019. So if you've been to an SCG or a MagicCon event in the past 3 or 4 years, there's a good chance that you've seen me there. I got into Magic playing right when I was in college and graduating from college. I graduated and needed to find some way to meet people of new friends, and found out that I could just find stores to go to and sit down and draft with people. And that's sort of how I got into Magic, was after college, drafting every Friday night at a shop in Columbus. And then got into judging because I really liked answering people's questions and trying to help out. But I really hate the phrase, I'm not a judge, but this is how it works, and thought that getting certified was going to give a little bit more credibility to my answers when I was at the LGS.
So, would you say that you do more judging these days, or more actually playing of Magic these days?
I definitely prioritize judging. It is like my primary income stream a lot of the time, but I do still test with teams. I still play in local RCQs. The last RC I played in instead of worked was DC, so that was a little over a year ago. But I have played on the Pro Tour before and have aspirations to get back there at some point. So try and find the balance between judging and playing is tough, and I do skew towards judging currently, but I still like to stay in depth in like competitive formats whenever I can.
Nice. And when you are playing constructed Magic instead of judging, what are your favorite formats that you want to play?
I mean, typically it's going to depend on, the time of year in terms of the RCQ season, but
Yep.
reference is typically modern, followed by standard, followed by pioneer if it ever exists again. And then I do have some results in legacy, but I haven't played seriously legacy since MH3 came out.
Got it. Got it. So when you play, you're chasing invites and really grinding back for the Pro Tour, then, huh?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
time and the time investment's probably the more important thing than what format I'm playing typically. So yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. It's really cool and always great when people kind of get into the game and then expand into other parts of it other than just playing, such as judging or, I know we have some friends that are tournament organizers and stuff like that, and just kind of the lifeblood that lets the rest of us play competitively and typically go off without a hitch. So that's really cool. I think our listeners probably know this, but Mapson, you are also a judge. Like, how did you get into judging and how long have you been doing it?
So actually everything I'm about to say is somewhat similar to what Garrison just said. I've been a judge, I want to say 11 years, 11, 12, around there. Um, my store started running, I wanted my store to start running Affinims. So when I was in college, I was driving from Westchester, Pennsylvania down to I think Wilmington, Delaware, to a store called Comic Mania for Affinim. And I was driving like an hour, which is like doesn't make sense. So I was really wanted my store to start running Affinim. So I convinced my LGS owner to run Affinims, but he was like, "Well, I'm not dealing with it though. So like you can like run it at my store." I was like, "Okay, sweet." But then I was like, "Oh, I'm one of the youngest people here. I want people to have a reason to believe the things that I'm saying. So why don't I try to become a judge?" And so um I mentored under Judge who goes by Baldy. A lot of people may know him. I met him at an Eternal weekend. He was like, "Well, why don't you walk around with me? We'll see how you do." Or so the first thing he did was he asked me what are the steps for casting a spell, um, which I butchered. And in his head, he was like, "Oh, this is going to be a really long process." And then then he like shadowed me on a couple of calls, and I got them all right. And he was like, "I don't really know what's happening here, so I'm just going to have you take like a practice test to see how that goes." And I got it in like half the recommended amount of time, and I only missed one question. He was like, "Okay, so you couldn't answer the first question, but I think you're good at this." Um, and yeah, I certified at GP Washington. And then I was judging locally. I've judged a handful of bigger events. You don't see me judging as often as Garrison because where we differ is I definitely prefer playing by a lot. So I spend the majority of my time playing, though I am going to be doing some more judging in the new year. Like the last big event I judged was the first RC, I think, in Atlanta, and then I will be judging at the Spotlight Series in Atlanta next month as well.
You,
Nice. That's cool.
you were on
Yeah,
my
and
team
I
on
can.
that Sunday, weren't you?
Say again?
We were on the event together on Sunday morning.
Yes, we were.
On the
You
rebound
were
event,
my
right?
team lead.
Yep.
Oh, awesome. There you go. Small world, small world. And I will say, I do know that you prefer to play these days, Mapson, but I have seen you conscripted into service on multiple occasions when you've shown up at like sealed RCQs and it's the first time that store has run it. And it's just like, this has happened multiple times, I think now at different stores where you're just like, okay, I will run this event. Like, so we
Yeah,
appreciate your service, sometimes putting the rest of us over, your own desire to play sealed.
that happens. The other thing is like a day or two before an event, like somebody will get sick and the owner will be like, "Hey, are you free?" It's like, "No, I'm playing in your RCQ." They're like, "Are you sure you're playing?" I was like, "I guess not."
You have been dropped. Oh man. All right, cool. Well, so now that we've established that both of you are pretty credible when it comes to what we're about to talk about, let's jump right in and talk about Worlds. So Worlds, for maybe our listeners that are more slanted towards Eternal Magic, Worlds was standard and limited. And on the final day, which is all constructed in the top eight, Seth Manfield, who ultimately, spoiler alert, went on to win Worlds. Uh, he had a pretty sloppy first match against Ken Yukihara on stream. And I don't want to speculate why, but like it was just, I felt myself in Seth's position where you kind of like make a mistake and you feel it and you wear it a little bit. And it led to a couple of interesting scenarios here that I think we should talk about, where a take back was allowed, actually two different times. So let's talk about the first one. In this match, there was a Cavern of Souls that was making a creature uncounterable, and Seth was playing Is It Lessons, which runs some amount of counter magic, not a lot, but it had It'll Quench You in there, which is basically one in a blue. It's a instant lesson, counter target spell unless its controller pays, two generic. And so he had quenched an uncounterable spell. And you could see he like immediately was like, oh my God, and like kind of put his hands up and, he asked for a take back, which was granted. And of course, YouTube and Twitch chat immediately are like freaking out about it. And so, let's pause right there before we get into the other situation. Like, first of all, obviously it was, I mean, some of the most talented judges judge the final, top eight at Worlds. Like these guys are obviously qualified and they made the decision. But like, could you maybe talk a little bit about what's behind that ruling and like why they allowed Seth the take back there that, it seemed like so many players were really surprised about. And even the commentators, frankly, sounded pretty surprised about it.
Yeah, so there's sort of this conception or a misconception even that I see a lot with players, where when you're playing at F&M, which we refer to as regular rules enforcement level, you can take back just about anything. You can, make a blatant mistake and take it back, et cetera, et cetera. We're there to learn. We're there to have fun. The stakes might be a few dollars worth of store credit, a few packs on the line, but like nothing serious. And then when you go to the other side of the spectrum, when you're at competitive REL, so you're at an RCQ or an RC, if you're at professional REL because you're at Worlds or the Pro Tour or day 2 of a GP, they have the expectation that there can be no takebacks ever. If you make a play, you're stuck with it. Sorry, there's nothing you can do. And that's not actually true by Magic policy. So the policy document that applies to all levels of sanctioned play, so that includes anything from F&M all the way up until Worlds, is our Magic Tournament rules. And there's sometimes we'll make distinctions between different rules enforcement levels, but for reversing decisions, it's all the same policy regardless of what event you're in. You just might end up being more lax about it when you're at F&M. With that, this was put in place. This whole section 4.8 of the Magic Tournament rules was put in place right around Ravnica Allegiance. So that was back in 2018, 2019 or so. And so since then, we've had this policy in place that allows players to take back a decision. Largely, I'm going to read like probably the most key paragraph of it. Sometimes a player will realize that they have made a wrong decision after making a play. If that player has not gained any information since taking the action and they wish to make a different decision, a judge may allow that player to change their mind. Judges must carefully consider whether the player has gained information since making the play that might have affected the decision. And that policy in the MTR, the Magic Tournament rules, is in place whether you're playing in F&M or in Sunday of Worlds. Like, we are following the same policy at whatever level of organized play that we're playing at.
Yeah, that does make sense. And so one of the things that, people were talking about, like, he gained information, he gained information. The information that I saw a lot of people in Twitch chat, or actually I was watching on YouTube chat, were complaining about was that it was uncounterable. They're like, hey, he got new information. He didn't realize it was uncounterable. And then like it was pointed out that it was, and that's when he asked for the take back. That's not really new information though, right? Like that's public, like, the cavern was named with a creature type. It was public, right? Is that kind of on the line?
The issue with this policy, because I'm not going to say it's flawless or perfect, because no part of policy actually is, but this is one of the parts of Magic policy that is a little bit more subjective based on the judge who's taking the call. Because what one judge may consider new information, another judge might not. There can be real small things that lead to new information, like a pause from the opponent, them reaching for mana, them starting to consider their hand, that may be lighting up like, oh, now this player's thinking about counter magic when they weren't before because the opponent's tapped out, but now they're thinking about force negation. Nothing new concrete has been introduced, but it could be something that the judge thinks is enough that tipped them off that they want to change their play because of something their opponent did. Something as well, so even if information's face up, if the opponent points it out or sort of highlights why it's a misplay, that can also be considered new information, because even though it's not new, if this player is all knowing and all observant, it's new to them in the moment because their opponent pointed out. So like if I play turn 1 island and my opponent goes, oh, thank goodness you're not going to Thoughtseize me. I'm like, oh, I do want to Thoughtseize you. That's right. Can I play swamp instead? It's sort of your opponent who's giving you that information that maybe Thoughtseize could be a good idea here, as opposed to you coming to the realization yourself that's like, oh, I'd rather play swamp because I want Thoughtseize, because I realized I have a Thoughtseize in my hand that I just drew for my turn 1. The thing here with Ken and Seth's game is that the cavern had just been played that moment, essentially. Like when you go back and look at the stream. So Ken has 2 lands out, neither of them are cavern, untapped lands at least. Plays his cavern, named Spider. Go and point out there's some amount of language barrier here due to Ken most likely having some English language barrier things there with Seth. And the table judges are reaching for the indicator to put the spider token on it for the stream sake and things like that. And Seth sees Spider being cast, sees 2 lands being tapped for mana, reaches out his counterspell, the It'll Quench Ya, picks up his 2 treasures, sets it aside, and before he's even like fully set the treasures down, he looks, he's like, oh, that's a cavern right there. Can I not cast this? And so in this case, Seth sort of came to his own realization that said, oh, I was just countering whatever was going to be cast here because you don't have 2 mana to pay for it. But I didn't realize that's a cavern. I want to take this back. I'm realizing this myself. So largely there, like, I think judges reading policy there should be like, Seth realized it was a cavern himself. It wasn't his opponent saying, hey, dude, that's uncounterable. Sorry, you're stuck to it.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it. So
so
the fact that
I
he
want
sort
to
of
add to
realized it
this.
in the moment matters. Yeah, go ahead, Mapson.
So one thing to point out too is like some number of people might be thinking like, oh, Ken should have like very clearly stated like I'm using cavern mana. First, I want to say that's not necessarily the case. This is written into the policy as an approved tournament shortcut. Whenever you're using mana, it's assumed you're using the like if an ability can generate or like if a card can generate different types of mana, it is assumed you're using the most specific case. So in this case, like it is assumed that you are tapping the cavern to make it uncounterable unless you say otherwise. So that's the first thing. In terms of new information gain, I also saw people saying like, oh, it's shown that Seth or sorry, rather that Ken couldn't have or didn't have a response, which is not really new information. It's an open decklist event. He
Plus, what
actually just
response
doesn't
would you have
have,
to your uncounterable thing getting countered, right? Like, what?
Yeah.
but true, but like he also just doesn't have like instant speed, really anything, and
Yeah.
there's like not much even in the format for 1 mana.
So
Um,
here's a question, actually. Like the fact that this was open deck list actually provides players with some of that information. However, it assumes that the player would have completely memorized the deck list in the time that they're given. And you would like, again, think that like world's finals and world class players, that probably is the case. But, as a judge, when you're called into a situation like this, does the tournament being open deck list versus closed deck list influence how you might approach a ruling in this type of situation at all? Does the fact that, the world's top 8 was open, does that take away some of like that, hey, like you could gain information here because the deck lists are completely known by both players?
yes and no at the same time. People are dumb, myself included. It's very easy to sit down, look at a deck list, and forget everything in 5 seconds. So you can't assume that the players remember everything, but there are some broad strokes things that you would expect them to remember and pay attention to. And again, you don't necessarily know that everybody's going to think the same way as you do, right? Like if I am playing against a blue deck, one of the first things I'm doing is checking to see if they have counter magic, and if so, like what kind of counter magic? Because knowing if I need to play around Daze versus Spell Pierce versus Mana Leak versus Quench, all of that is very different. And so, but somebody else might not look for those same things. But this is an example where you would kind of expect him to look to see, okay, what kind of interaction does my opponent possibly have? And it's very easy to remember they don't have any interaction. And this, again, this is that world. So, like, in a case like this, I would kind of expect them to know that. But, policy doesn't say treat them differently in the top 8 of worlds versus treat them differently round 1 of an RC.
Yeah. It's likely that Seth has Ken's entire 75 memorized. He knows he's playing against Ken first thing in the morning. He has all night to memorize it, to work on it, to make sure he knows his sideboarding plan, things like that. But like I said, that's like the top 8 of worlds. That is its own thing, essentially, in some ways. My personal anecdote, playing in an RC, much lower level, of course, but it was a Pioneer event. I was playing against Black-Green Ass Rat combo, and 3 turns in a row, I played around my opponent potentially having Collected Company because he kept on holding up 4 mana. We finished game 1, I look at the deck list, there's no Collected Company on the deck list. Like, I just, what is my opponent playing? I don't have the full 75 memorized. Well, his lines of play indicate card A being in his deck. I'm going to play around card A. But if I had photographic memory, I could know that card A does not exist in his deck, right? So in generally speaking, the open deck list doesn't preclude us from ruling out information that's being gained by bluffs and indication of priority passes and things like that, even if this person's deck list has 0 cards in it that could be played there.
Interesting.
So the other thing I did want to point out about this moment too is just like, I mean, Garrison kind of said it, but Seth caught things incredibly quick for this quench. And so like, yes, Ken does kind of point at the spot at like the cavern. And I also think when he played the cavern, like just I think even if you watch the clip muted, I think it's like very clear that he's playing it and then immediately playing an uncounterable thing just from his mannerisms of the way he pointed at it, the way he put it on the stack and everything. But the whole thing happened incredibly quick. Seth like plays it and like Garrison said, doesn't even really have the treasures completely off the board and is like, I don't want to do this. And it seems like Ken was kind of like kind of chuckled and was like almost like that makes sense. And so like, yes, this is a play you can make. You can counter well, you can attempt to counter an uncounterable thing and just like get screwed
Yeah, like if
when
you need
your
the
opponent
lesson in
points
the
it out.
graveyard,
But
right? Like, I mean, that's a real thing with accumulate wisdom, right? Like if you need that
yes,
third lesson in the yard to draw 3, maybe you do want to throw the it'll quench you away just for the third one. That wasn't the scenario there, right? But like, yeah, I mean, you're very right that it is a legal play to make in the first place.
I know I've definitely remanded an Emrakul just because I wanted to draw a card and hopefully kill my opponent.
Yeah.
Yep. Did
And
you?
yeah.
No,
I
but I
I cast
tried.
a Sinister Sabotage one time against a Carnage Tyrant, and my opponent on Arena started BM emoting me, just like, you idiot, like, why would you do this? Well, I surveil 1 card deeper, and I found the board wipe because I surveil 1 card deeper. Like, sometimes,
Yep.
yeah, the extra text in your counterspell is relevant here, or, like you said, getting a lesson in the yard, things like that. It is a legal play, but Seth realized it wasn't the legal play he wanted to make, and that's sort of the big deal with this one.
Got it. And so one of the things that both of you guys pointed out when you were talking about this is how quickly he sort of like asked for the take back, right? There wasn't additional information gained in most people's opinion because of how quick it was and open deck list, et cetera, et cetera. So now the next instance of this was not so quickly identified, I'll say, or called for a take back by Seth. And so to set it up for, again, folks that may not have actually watched the coverage, Seth is playing an Is It Lessons deck, which essentially uses artists' talent to rummage through their deck rather quickly, plays a lot of card draw and removal. It's a blue-red deck with some cost reducers like Grand, which, by the way, like as somebody just watching Avatar with their daughter for like the very first time, seeing Grand show up as a powerhouse in Magic is just like absolutely hysterical. No spoilers, by the way. We're just starting season 2. But in this instance, the way the deck kills is effectively Monument of Endurance, which has 3 modes. You can trigger each mode once per turn when you discard a card, and the modes are draw a card, create a treasure, or dome your opponent for 3. And so effectively, you basically draw and make treasures until you've amassed such an advantage that you can just trigger it in your turn, trigger it in their turn, typically with multiple monuments with the 3 to the dome effect, and they die pretty quickly once you get going. And now this was an incredibly grindy game in the same match with Ken. And Seth was down to 4 cards in library, and he had an artist's talent, which is a May, so he wasn't forced to discard, but he also had monuments, and he was very close to not having enough resources to actually finish the game. And in fact, the casters had thought that he perhaps didn't even have an avenue to win the game at that point because he was so low on resources, and he needed to draw cards to be able to discard cards to be able to trigger the monuments to win. And so he really had to use every part of the buffalo to ultimately win this game here. But at one point, he had put a Boomerang Basics on the stack, which is a sorcery lesson for 1 blue mana. You return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if it's something that you controlled, you also draw a card. So typically you would like bounce your cheap thing, typically a Storm Chaser's talent, back to your hand to replay it for extra value and card draw to get your engine going. But it's also a get out of jail free card against troubling permanents that your opponents might have, things like, High Noon or whatever that might, try to lock you out from doing your thing as the monument deck. And so Seth had put a Boomerang Basics on the stack, targeting his own permanent, which would have drawn him a card. And it was probably about 5. I didn't actually time it, but it was at least 5, maybe even 10 seconds where, the mana was tapped, the Boomerang Basics was face up on the board. He had announced a target, but he hadn't actually taken any of the game actions of like returning the card to the hand, drawing the card from the library. He just kind of had it face up. And then I think he realized, like, oh crap, I might have just killed myself. And that, which would have been the case. And so he asked for a take back there too, so that, which was granted, so that he could take a different line and ultimately find a winning line with a different, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what he did, but he won with a 0 cards in library in what was a really incredible finish for him to find that line in the first place. But he almost took himself out along the way. And so when he called the judge over, I even heard him say on coverage, he say, I've cast this. Can I take it back? Like, he even like was indicating that it was fully cast. And so, like, again, like, is it the same sort of stuff we were just talking about that applies here? Is it a little bit different because he didn't catch it so quickly? Like, what sort of governs this take back versus the first one?
So time by itself doesn't factor into too much when it comes to Magic. Like, there could be times that you stare at your opponent for 30 seconds because you're confused about who has priority. There are times that just because 30 seconds has elapsed, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, that doesn't mean anything specific within policy. Game actions, where the game is, what actions have been taken, what's on the stack. Talk about missed triggers. If we've moved past where the trigger could be on the stack, based on the game actions we take, those are all more relevant things a lot of time. The big thing here is that Seth waited long enough to find out, or not to say that he was finding out whether Ken had things he'd like to do or not in response. But by waiting so long, the lack of action from Ken in the spot indicated that Ken did not have things. Like, I don't know if he explicitly passed priority or if he just said F6'd, but by him finding out that Ken does not have anything that he'd like to do in response to his artist talent or his artist talent trigger or his Boomerang Basics, that could be conceived as new information, and maybe it's not proper to take it back. The big thing, like, Ken doesn't have interaction that would matter here based on his deck list.
He actually does have post board interaction.
So with the 3 mana he has up, I believe he has access to Bitter Triumph, which is a removal spell for Gran, or Harvester Misery for Gran. He has 1 cycling card that can naturalize, but he's already used that card this game, and he only has 1 copy in his 75. So there's 1 unknown card in the hand, and the relevant interaction he can have is to kill Gran. He doesn't have anything that can kill Monument, which that's the big thing here. Let's assume this is closed deck list, and just the card Naturalize could be in Ken's hand as his last card. Seth goes to cast his Boomerang Basics. Ken would be incentivized to naturalize the Monument Endurance before the looting triggers would resolve on the stack, right? And the fact that he doesn't do that points out to Seth, or whoever the active player is in this case, that, oh, my opponent doesn't have interaction. Maybe I don't need to be as aggressive. I can take another turn and find a line that's going to give me a more get value out of this monument next turn as opposed to this turn that I need to right now. And that's sort of like a difference here as opposed to the quench that he realized himself before there was really a priority pass at all coming from Ken. That's at least my analysis of like watching the clip back a few times.
I agree with all that. Also, a point I'm just going to go ahead and throw out that I really haven't seen people saying, and I might get hate for this. I think he should have been hit with a slow play here. Just based off the sheer amount of time. No, like in all seriousness, that turn, like I timed it from start to finish. That was egregious. And yes, there's some added complexity based off of how long this call took, but he really doesn't actually take that many actions on this turn. And even just the amount of time from like casting the boomerang basics to eventually calling a judge to be like, I don't want to do this. And then he stops to think even longer before taking the next action. Like, that was ridiculous.
Well, so I will just say for the listeners that you and I have played a 2-hour RCQ finals in a one-seater before, so neither of us are shy to take time when there are some stakes on the line. Worlds is certainly much, much, much higher stakes than an RC invite, so I don't think I have as a non-judge, I don't think I have a problem in an untimed round like that, letting the guy think. But I do hear you.
Time versus untimed does
There was
not
a lot of
matter.
time. Yeah, so I understand, but also there's like as a sports fan, for example, right? Like in some situations, you let them play like in a playoff game or something like that if there's a ticky-tack foul. Yeah, no, I know.
No.
I'm getting the head shake for people that aren't watching video. Mapson's giving me the big ol' head shake.
I I was gonna say, Seth is certainly a player that has likely been described as deliberate on stream by commentators, which is often a way of saying, he plays pretty slow sometimes. I was gonna say the quench play is about the fastest play I've ever seen Seth make. So the fact that he makes it, he's just like, oh, wait a second, that's
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah.
that. I'm like that was like lightning speed for Seth, like having watched him play before.
So I don't want to rag on
So
Seth for too long, but one other quick story about him being a, we'll say, deliberate player was I was at a judge conference a long time ago, and there was a conference on slow play, and a big thing that was being said was like, if you are struggling to tell what's going on or like whose turn it is, that's an issue. And the way we got there was a judge put up a clip. He was like, I'm going to play different clips from different like coverage moments, and you tell me when you guys think this is slow play. So he put up a clip of one of Seth's matches, and about 2 minutes passes, uh, n- and then he just asks like whose turn it is. Like no one even knows where we are. Like literally nothing has happened. It's just been like Seth and I can't remember whose opponent was, just staring at each other for 2 minutes.
yeah, that's fair. Uh, Almost a little. So my favorite slow play call of all time was Nassif against Ari Lax when Nassif was on Affinity, and he's also a very deliberate player, of course, even on Magic Online. Like it's just hilarious to see. He like loses to the clock more than his opponent, I think, half the time. But yeah, that was one where he was given a slow play warning and he asked to appeal, and the judge that gave him the warning said, "Okay, but continue play while we get the appeal judge." And he said no and just sat there and spent more time thinking. So that was a pretty famous one. But yeah, some complicated situations. That one was Ravager map. This one was Seth trying to find a line to not deck, but I gotta say, like as a player and not a judge, like if you're in worlds, I think you gotta, short of angle shooting or doing something unethical, I think you gotta take every inch they'll get you. And if they're gonna give him the time to think, I think that's fine for him to do that. But I also did hear what you say that maybe they shouldn't be giving him the time to think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, on one hand, yes, players should know their decks. On the other hand, how often do you get to the situation where you have one monument in play, one monument in the deck, you have 4 cards left, your opponent's at 13, and you need to piece together 4 monument triggers plus an attack, essentially. Like it was like a novel situation, like to figure out.
It
I
was about as
agree, and
tricky as it gets in that matchup, I think.
Yeah.
like I don't blame him for taking that amount of time, but I do think he should have been called on it. Like I'm not saying like he should have looked at it and immediately had an answer, but like part of Magic tournaments are testing that you can figure out these puzzles in a reasonable amount of time. And I believe, and people can disagree, but I believe that he took a pretty unreasonable amount of time. And if that, if playing at a reasonable pace means you lose, then it means you lose, and like that is what it is, and it sucks. But like you've got 3 more games, you can win one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty great that he figured out the line, though. I mean, I'll tell you, like 99.9% of the people in chat complaining about it would have just hit escape concede if it was an arena match and they were on ladder in that situation. So, everything else aside, it was a pretty wild way to end the game.
The other thing I'd like to point out for the judges at the event, one of the appeals judges, so effectively one of the head judges from the weekend, did post a thing earlier today. I linked it to both of you. I don't know if you all do show notes or documents or stuff like that that people read, but they pointed out, the judge pointed out a line in the IPG. So talk about another one of the books that we have as judges, the rules we follow, the policy for how games play. The infraction procedure guide is our way of saying, when things go wrong, this is how we fix it. But one of the first things in the IPG, one of the paragraphs says, if a minor violation is quickly handled by the players to their mutual satisfaction, a judge does not need to intervene. And it goes on a little bit more beyond that. And, if it's a real problem, then yes, judges need to step in and give whatever penalty and provide the proper fix and things like that. But another thing that the judge said that was not quoting the IPG directly is the IPG specific rules and procedures, and MTR as well for reversing decisions policy. Our procedures are there to govern interactions when things are unclear or when players disagree. Sportsmanship, which many top professional MTG players value highly, can lead players to be more generous toward their opponents than the rules strictly require. As long as that leniency comes from a genuine gesture of good faith, is not pressured by the opponent, and does not derail the game, but instead helps both players enjoy a better match, judges will not intervene it and let the players agree on a larger takeback than what the rules allow. So, Alfonso, the judge who posted that, the appeals judge, he was not on the match itself, but having talked to the table spotters and the judges who were there, said, this is a time when we may not have taken this back if it was just asked to the judges. But the fact that Seth said, can I take this back? And Ken responded affirmatively, allowed the table judge to say, hey, if both of you are fine with this card not being played, we'll act as though this card wasn't played. And that's one of those things where, like, maybe the rules say we shouldn't, as a judge, I shouldn't approve a backup here, should not approve a backup here. But the players, if they're both good with it and they think this leads to a better game that they're both happier playing, if they both want this to be true, then this can be true for this game.
Got it. Yeah, that is interesting. And it did sound like Ken kind of said, yeah, yeah, and like waved his hand as if like, yeah, you can pick it up off the table. So that
Mhm.
does track that. I didn't realize that the rules allowed players to kind of agree on something that, otherwise wouldn't necessarily be allowed. So that's, very interesting. Something I certainly learned from all of this.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, at the end of the day, we want, talking we as like judges want games to be played out correctly. We want players to enjoy their time. We want the player who deserves to win to get to win the event. And we want players to walk away having had a good day of Magic, right? And so when there's a minor mistake, a player has a choice really of saying, hey judge, come fix this thing for us. Hey judge, my opponent did something wrong. I think my opponent gets a warning for this. Or they say, oh, hey, you forgot to play your land for turn before you cast your spell. Go ahead, play your land. Okay, yeah, you've legally cast your spell. Let's move on. Like, we both know what you're trying to do. Let's move on with our day, basically. And so takebacks is one of those things too, where it's just like, while as a judge, I have specific things that I'm looking for in terms of, is a takeback allowable here or is it not? If a player makes a play and then after a second, it's just like, oh, wait, can I do something else? And the opponent says, yeah, sure, that's fine. Like, I still feel good about this. Like, hey, if both players are fine with where the game is, then why, as a judge, do I need to step in?
Yeah, well, good guy Ken for sure. Certainly displayed a very high level of sportsmanship. I would like to think if I was in his spot, I would also have allowed those takes backs. But I'll tell you, top eight of worlds, it's like really hard to say yes to something like that. And so, I know we've been talking a bit about, a couple of these mistakes slash takebacks on Seth's side, but ultimately because he ended up going on and winning the tournament. If he had lost in that round, we probably would be talking about it a heck of a lot less. It would be more of an oddity than kind of the big story that it is. But definitely shout out to Ken for sure for, like understanding what was happening there and, allowing that flexibility maybe when it would not have otherwise been granted. Um, Something that you mentioned though, when you were just saying all the things that, like judges want as an outcome, one of the things that you said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that, you want the player that deserves to win to win. And so that's actually, it reminds me of, I was listening to an episode of the Jerry T podcast a little while ago. And this was when Dave was playing in an event that I think he ultimately ended up winning. And there was an issue where he and his opponent were both given a win in the same match. Are you familiar with this?
Yes,
Um,
I was not at this event, but I am aware of the situation you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, so the short version is that Dave's opponent had an Elish Norn in play, the one that shuts off your opponent's ETBs and doubles your own. And Dave went to play a saga that had read ahead. And so read ahead was a mechanic from a couple of sets ago where you can jump ahead basically when it enters to a future chapter. You don't have to start on chapter one. You can skip those chapters and go right to something later. And so effectively, Dave was already up a game. And if he had read ahead to chapter two, I believe on this saga, it was essentially demonic tutor. He wins the game on the spot, essentially. And the judge was called because the opponent thought that Elish Norn stopped the saga from being able to read ahead. It's not an ETB. It's like a game rule thing. You guys probably know the actual real term for it. I'm sure you do. But Elish Norn shouldn't have shut it off. Dave knew it shouldn't have shut it off. He appealed and he lost the appeal, actually. And shortly after, the judge came back and said, "Hey, what happened there? Did you lose that game?" And he said, "Yeah, I lost. We're in game three right now." And so he goes, "Okay, like before you submit results, like please come find me." And essentially, what happened was Dave should have won the match because he was up a game and basically would have won game two on the spot. He ended up losing game two because of the incorrect ruling. And then he lost game three as well. And so apparently the judge, can't believe Melee supports this, but apparently the judge was checking to make sure that Melee could support both players in the match being given a win in that match. But that's ultimately the fix that happened. And I was sort of blown away as soon as I heard that in the episode. I was texting our group chat with Mapson and it like, I've never heard of this fix before. Um, so I guess my question is not necessarily about that situation, but just like what is the policy around some of these off the wall fixes, like both players get a win? Like, is that in the rules or is that just something that you're allowed to do in the spirit of like, hey, this was like a pretty big freaking mistake and like we don't want to knock a player out of the tournament for it?
That is nowhere in the rules.
Yeah. I've never seen it. I've
Um,
lost a lot of matches I would love to have won. So
I,
That
that is in the rule of the head judge gets to do what they want, and that head judge, I'm not going to say, or not even that they went too far, but that head judge deemed this necessary, and it was the way that they had to restore parity or equity to that player when it was a judge's mistake that caused this player to lose a match that they should not have lost. It is not the only time it's happened. I have caused it before as well. Not that one, but another time that I gave an incorrect ruling effectively.
so I was going to ask, like, what's the craziest fix you've had to do in that vein? And it sounds like that exact same one might be the answer to that question, huh?
Yeah. Um, So the you want to hear this? Oh gosh.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, this is my like learn from my mistakes, and here's a little lesson wrapped up in it for all the baby judges out there, or people in general who may be players as well. This was a pioneer event in 2020, like right before COVID. This was in Indianapolis, like in March of that year, something like that. I get called to a table, and the matchup is mono red Chandra Planeswalkers. Like 12 copies of Chandra in the deck. Like hardcore Chandra. Chandra's regulator. Like they are playing Chandra Typal against blue white control. And Chandra player says, "Hey, can I ask you a question away from the table?" And ask me, "Hey, with Chandra Torch of Defiance, if I ult her, what all triggers her emblem?" So I'm going to pull up Chandra Torch of Defiance. And I pulled it up on Scryfall and read the card image out loud. And so I read her ability because, like, some Chandras care about red spells, some care about instants and sorceries. I'm just like, okay, let me make sure I'm answering this correctly. Okay, so I read this out loud. You get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. And so I look at the player, I say, pretty much anything besides a land is a spell. Artifacts are spells, creatures are spells, instants are spells. Anything that's not a land is basically a spell. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks, Judge. And he goes back to the table. I've answered his question, right? Do you notice the mistake in maybe what I did, or?
so if they're talking about casting a spell, so my guess is that they then like ticked up a Chandra or something and dealt 5 damage.
It wasn't that. I wasn't that wrong about it, essentially.
So
Whenever you cast a
can I
spell,
guess?
Yeah.
I would like to guess. So I I believe that this was printed before the Planeswalker redirection rule, and so it should have also been able to target a Planeswalker?
It should
yes.
be any target, not creature or player,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
So, but his question wasn't about what's the Oracle text on Chandra or can this
Right,
hit Planeswalkers. It was what triggers Chandra. And I didn't think about
right.
looking at Oracle text. I just read the card image, which had been errated because of the change to the Planeswalker redirection rule. All right. So fast forward 15 minutes. This match is going past time, and a spectator calls a judge over, and not me, some other judge. Judge comes to the table, says, "Hey, what's going on?" And the spectator says, "Hey, I think this player got incorrect information from a judge." And the board state is this player has altered their Chandra Torch Defiance. They have the emblem, and the blue-white control player is at negative 35 life. But the blue-white control player has a Gideon of the Trials out, which has the emblem. That's as long as you control a Gideon, you can't lose the game, and your opponent can't win the game. And he's also cast Approach of the Second Sons once, and apparently Approach of the Second Sons is the top card of his library right now. So this player has not been pointing his Chandra triggers at Gideon because he thinks it only targets creatures or players because of the answer that I gave him.
Oh, wow.
Which, to my credit, was not the question he was asking me. I just read the wrong thing out loud, basically. So the head judge gets pulled in. He talks to players. He says, "Hey, if we update your rules knowledge now, you shoot the Gideon and you win the game on the spot. If we say the game continues under your understanding, then this player untaps, draws Approach the Second Sun, and wins by casting that. Both of you have played this game to what would be considered a win. One of you got some information from a judge that led to you having some misconceptions about the rules. I'm going to break this match in half. I'm going to give both of you a win." Essentially, in the scorekeeping software, you take them out of the match and you assign both of them a bye. So they never
I see.
win. That's how like Melee would handle it. So while this is going on, this is 20 minutes past round, big event, 800 players, whatever. All of us judges are sitting off to the side, just, sort of relaxing before the next round starts and before we start our hustle of passing out match slips and everything we used to do back then. And the head judge comes out and says, "Before we move on to our next round, I want to tell you what I did," as a sort of, "Hey, don't do this at home" thing, and tells a little bit about the situation and says, "Please, if you think that you're supposed to break a match to give both players a match win, you're probably not supposed to. This was, an extenuating circumstances. This is extreme. Please don't do this at your local events. Please do not assume this is something that's normal and should be happening every other event." And he goes on his way, and I'm just like, oh man, what person could have messed up this call? What person could have made a mistake that badly? And a judge from the area looked at me and was like, "Hey, your initials are GF, right?" And we used to sign match slips and initial
Yeah.
them when we gave out time extensions and such. I'm like, "Yeah, my initials are GF." He's like, "You're the only initials that were on that match slip. You must have answered that call." I'm just like, what did I do wrong? And I actually had
Oh,
to contact
no.
players and talk to them about it and be like, "What did I say?" He's like, "Oh, you said it could only target creatures and players, so I never targeted Chandra." I'm like, oh. So lesson
Wow.
for anyone out there: when someone asks you a question, read the Oracle text. Don't read the card. Legacy players, don't trust that card. It's lying to you. Read the Oracle text. Otherwise, you're going to mess up things that you don't even know that you're messing up.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. That like the little thing that you don't think matters, right? Like you said, that wasn't even part of the player's question. But it's information that they got and that they worked with. So yeah, kind of crazy. Now before this conversation, I only knew of one example of that happening, and now I have two.
Oh,
So there you go. Merry Christmas to me.
it is, like I said, not very common, should not be done very often. But yes.
So I was actually in kind of a weird situation at SCG Philly a few years ago. It was a Domain Rhinos mirror, and I'm still unsure of how I should have handled it. And so I'd love to just kind of throw it out there and get your guys' opinion on it. So my opponent, so this was modern Domain Rhinos, and so essentially it's the Cascading Footfalls deck with the Cascade cards, and it also briefly played the Scion of Draco package with Leyline of the Guild Pact. This was like right when Leyline of the Guild Pact came out, and everybody was putting it in every deck, and actually it was pretty good in that deck. Rest in peace, Rhinos, unbanned Violent Outburst. But
Please no.
I think it would be fine, but that's another conversation for another episode. Um, so what happened was my opponent was on two lands, and it was a Beseju and the Grixis Triome, Xander's Lounge. And they had a Leyline of the Guild Pact in play, though. And so I had drawn Leyline Binding for my turn, and I wanted to leyline binding their leyline of the guild pact in their upkeep so that I could play around Force of Negation. And so they were tapped out of their two lands because they had just played a Scion. So it was critical that I get this leyline off the board so that I can interact with their Scion. And so I said, pass the turn in your upkeep. I'll leyline binding your leyline. And I tap the mana and I put the leyline face up. And my opponent looks at the leyline, looks at me, and draws a card. And so I said, well, what did you draw that card for? Like, I'm thinking there was an effect in their upkeep or something like that that I had missed. It was a very simple board state. So I'm like, why are you drawing a card? And it was, oh, for my turn. So immediately judge, put the hand up, call judge comes over. I explain the situation like I just did. They talk. And I didn't even have to appeal. They actually consulted with the head judge for that event. And that's the person that gave me the ruling. And they had declared that I was acting in the draw step and that I should have been more clear that I had actions in their upkeep. And so I think what happened in that situation was they didn't realize how critical that draw was. Because if my opponent had drawn Beseju or Leyline Binding, either one of those, they get to respond to my Leyline Bindings, enter the battlefield, and remove it. So their Leyline of the Guild Pact never goes away. Because if their Leyline of the Guild Pact goes away, they can never cast Leyline Binding. The Beseju essentially is their only answer at that point. And so to me, the game hinges on this. And I felt as if my opponent saw the ley line, heard me fine. We had no communication errors at any point earlier in the match at all, and just chose to draw a card. And they even said, "Oh, hey, my fault. I'm just okay to put a random card back on top if that's what you guys want." Like all hunky dory. And it's like, well, of course, because you didn't draw the thing you needed, and even if you did, now you have a 1 in 6 chance of it still being in your hand if that's the fix that gets implemented, which isn't what happened. And so for me, like I just accepted the ruling because I was in the awkward situation of like, I didn't want to accuse my opponent of trying to cheat me directly in front of them. But like, to me, it was pretty clear that like, hey, this is really critical. My opponent chose to just, not acknowledge what I did, even though it was very clear. The card was face up on the table. I had announced it before they'd even untapped. And they chose to draw anyway. And I felt a little put out by that. Now, not only did I win the match, I also won another judge call after that because I tried to, I had Teferi Plus and I suspended a Crashing Footfalls in their end step, which they insisted I couldn't do. I said, oh, you absolutely can. I called that same judge right back. I was like, get back here. I know this one for a fact. And so anyway, I ended up winning both another judge call and the match. But I kind of left a sour taste in my mouth a little bit. And so my assessment was, again, that like, I don't feel like the judges that were responding to that call really like understood the criticality of like what it would have meant if my opponent had drawn a leyline binding right there. And I felt like I was getting cheesed a little bit. How would you guys, just having judged some big events and maybe having been in that situation as a player or something similar like that, like if somebody finds themselves in a similar position that I was in, where you don't necessarily want to accuse your opponent to their face of trying to cheat you, but like you probably feel like that's what's happening, like what might be a way that a player could handle that or object, in an event like an RC or something like that?
So I feel like there's not really a great way for you to do that. I mean, the simplest thing is you can just say, "Hey, judge, can I ask you away from the table something?" And then I feel like you come back and it's like kind of obvious what's going on, or just say like, "Hey, I want to give you additional details to the story. I'd rather not do it here." Uh, are are options you can take. And I will say, in your story, as described, it is a little bit weird that they ruled that you did it in draw step. Like, on one hand, it is the easiest fix, but if the card was like legitimately on the table and everything before they drew their card, I don't think I love it. But Garrison, how do you feel?
Yeah. Want to echo that. If you ever, like you were saying, like calling your opponent a cheater or accusing them of cheating right in front of them is rarely going to end well. If you have issues, if you have like, oh, I think this is intentional, malicious, ask to talk to the judge away from the table and just lay out why it matters and why this is impactful. Because come to a call, a judge may not know, is this a simple rules thing I'm fixing, or is this I need to be investigating for something deeper? And giving them context of why it matters can highlight that to someone who isn't as keyed in. The other thing is here, I guess, a question for you. Did they have the interaction?
So they didn't end up drawing it, no.
Yeah. So like the call here in terms of saying, oh, we're just gonna say that you're acting in their draw step. If you had told me, hey, this opens up Boseiju or Leyline Binding as an additional card that they could draw as their interaction piece to interact with my Leyline, because their counter magic doesn't interact. It's like specifically these cards. I take a look at their hand, I see 6 stinkers. I say, well, we can go through the rigmarole of choosing a card random, putting it back on top, then them drawing that card right away. But if I know that they didn't draw the thing that causes them to this to be relevant, then I can save a little bit of time. And we're going, because it ended up not being the thing that would have been impactful here. Well, yes, they should have only had 5 cards, not 6 cards. They shouldn't have had that last card. If that last card didn't actually matter for interaction, it didn't matter in this case. It could. And you're right. But then also then I look at that player and say, that's weird. Which card do you draw for turn? And they say a card that wasn't the interaction piece. And then I have a lot more questions as to why did you draw a card if you already had the Leyline Binding in your hand? Things like that.
Got it. Got it. So that's interesting. That's good to know that judge can sort of take into account the context of the situation there. Yeah, I probably should. I ask plenty of questions away from the table when I don't want to give away information from my hand or tip off the card I'm asking for the oracle text on or something like that. But probably should have done it in that situation as well to sort of make sure that they understood what I thought was going on there. So yeah, probably a good call.
There are sometimes as a judge, I will look at one of the player's hands and sort of not to like dismiss your concerns, but like ask you to trust me that this ruling is being done, because the other thing that we could be doing will not matter in this case. Like I said, if I'm staring at 4 lands and 4 creatures, 2 more scions or whatever, it's just like, listen, like we can get into it, but like we don't need to be concerned this time. This player's hand does not have the interaction that we need to be concerned and go into a deep investigation as to whether this card was drawn or not.
I would want to caution newer judges in particular, and also judges who don't follow competitive Magic as closely. Do be careful with doing things like that, because you may give away information to the opponent, which is like obviously not a thing we want to do. And I'm not saying you can never like do what just happened, but like just be careful. And then also as a player in situations like that, when it's kind of ruled things aren't going my way, one of the things I would also like recommend pointing out is like, why would I have done it in draw step? Like this, like it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense for me to do
Yeah,
X.
yeah, and so it was never under contention that, like, I said draw step or anything like that. They basically said, like, "Hey," like, it wasn't clear exactly when it was happening, like, they've already drawn their card, and so we're gonna rule that this is all happening in the draw step, which I said, "Hey, there's no way that that's what actually happened," but, that I was looking at the guy in the red shirt telling me this, and I'm like, "Okay, well, you're the head judge for the event, so I'm just gonna shut up and nod and smile in case I need you again later in the event." I don't wanna, like, sit here and argue necessarily after you've made your ruling, but, yeah, like you guys said, maybe I should have, fully explained the situation. I can tell you for sure, my opponent and I were both well aware of the importance of, drawing or not drawing a ley line binding in that situation, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Um, so you guys have judged a lot of events. I've personally seen maps and issue a bunch of game losses. Dude, there was that one event in Wilmington where I was joking that you had more kills than whoever like ended up winning the tournament, man. That was like so brutal. Like I had to tell you to back off a little bit. You can't win from the judge's seat. But like what are some of the things that you guys see are like the most common like bonehead mistakes that people should not do if they don't want to get game losses? Like deck reg, I think, is an obvious one. Decklist.org or like Goldfish has one where you can just export it right to a paper deck list, like print it out the night before, guys. There's no reason to be handwriting this thing 10 minutes before the freaking event starts. Like, get your act together, have it in your backpack. But besides deck list, which I think is pretty common, like what are some of the easily avoidable things that you guys see just come up time and time again where you're like, I wish players would just stop doing this?
Yeah, like you said, deck reg is definitely one of the most common. And I actually have a really funny deck reg story I kind of want to just share real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, at so the GP that I top aided, it's like day two, and I'm playing against somebody, and we sit down and we get deck checked, and they come back, and my opponent has gotten a game loss, and they are like pissed, which I've received my share of deck reg game losses. It's embarrassing. I'm never happy, but like this person's like really mad about it, and they just take the card that was wrong and tear it up in front of me, and I was like, I was- and it wasn't the most expensive card, but it also wasn't like 50 cents, it was like a few bucks. So I'm like, hey man, like, is everything okay? And he's like, I loaned this deck to my friend last week, and he asked about playing this card, and I told him it was wrong, and I guess he did it anyways and didn't tell me before he returned the deck. So I just registered the same 75 I handed him, and it's wrong because that changed it. I'm just like,
Oh
oh
my
yeah,
God.
I'd be pissed too.
So maybe the best part of this story was that was his friend's copy of the card, it sounds like, right? Like, oh man, that's crazy. That is, yeah, wow. So also check your deck box if you're if you haven't thumbed through and personally sleeved up your 75 as well. Garrison, how about you?
Yeah, the three main times that game losses are given out are deck list registration, like you said. So be careful with that. Register it ahead of time. Have a friend count it for you. Things like that. Fresh set of eyes does wonders for deck lists, right? Second one is getting deck checked and having extra cards in your deck box. Basically, when we do a deck check, if we find cards beyond your 75 that are legal in that format, we consider them as part of your sideboard, and therefore you have too many cards in your sideboard and you get game lost. So if you're borrowing, swapping cards between friends, make sure you have two deck boxes with you. One for your deck, one for all your random stuff, right? Don't leave anything in your deck box that's not relevant for that particular event that you're playing. And then the third one is when you're presenting your deck. If you get deck checked or your opponent counts your deck and you present fewer than 60 cards, that is instant game loss territory. So like check your sideboard before you present. Count out your 15. Make sure, or pile count once per game if that's what you want to do. But like make sure you present 60 cards minimum. Make sure that you have your, look at your sideboard. I have 15 cards in my sideboard. Here's my deck. Like just make sure that you're being careful when you're presenting your deck. That's the other big time that game losses can happen.
Got it. Yeah, all very good advice and all things that are easily avoidable. And, I'm glad you called it pile counting because it bothers me to no end people that use it as a shuffle. It is not shuffle. If you know the starting position of a card in your deck before you do it, you will know the starting position of that card when you're done doing it. So it's not a shuffle, but it is good for counting if you're worried that you might be given fewer than 60 or 80 if you're a Yorion Truther in Legacy, if you're one of the few.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's a show for us, guys. Garrison, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to find you, is there any social media or anything that you care to share, or should we just yell judge as loud as we can at the next SCG event?
I won't be at Atlanta, but I will be at most of the rest for this year. But yeah, call a judge for events. If you want to find me specifically, I'm at Hanware Garrison on Twitter. You can find me there. And one of my passion projects, I haven't really worked on it recently, but I sort of keep up a modern interaction guide that just like deals with a lot of weird interactions between cards that are likely to come up in your normal like modern RCQ, and that's like one of the things I like working on. So, read that, learn some things from it. Reach out to me on Hanware Garrison on Twitter or
That
X.
is an awesome handle, by the way, dude. That's fantastic. I love it. Mapson's got Expedition Map. You've got Hanawar Garrison. That is a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
The
All right. Well, thank you so much for what's that?
I was gonna say the first pre-release I worked as a judge was Eldritch Moon pre-release, and Hanware
Oh,
Garrison
it's so
was one of the
fitting.
cards. And I feel everyone that day is just like, I'll attack with Hanware Garrison. And I turn around and be like, what? And it just like cemented in my brain as Hanware Garrison is going to be my name card essentially. So Hanware Garrison is me on Twitter. Yep.
That is so good. Well, hey, if you've stuck with us this long, you must like what you've heard. If you're new to the pod, please like, subscribe, add us to your favorite podcast app. Find us on YouTube. Hitting that subscribe button on YouTube costs us nothing, or costs you nothing, I should say, but it helps us significantly. So we would really appreciate if you did that. Also, you can go to ewcast.com to find all of our links, including to the merch store. So if you're watching on YouTube and you like my sweet hat and you want one for yourself, how could I blame you? It's really cool. It's comfortable. It's awesome. We have other stuff as well. Check out ewcast.com. Well, with that, thanks a lot, guys. This has been a lot of fun. I always like talking about weird rules, and now I know a second person that's given wins to both players in a match. So, holy cow, what a treat for me today. Thanks a lot for joining us. And that's a wrap.
I
I
Cool.